Hey guys, I'm in Rosslyn Chapel, in the crypt of Rosslyn Chapel, and I came here, if you remember the movie The Vinci Code, they descended at one point in a crypt and to find the Holy Grail. So they descended here. And then they found a door. And that crypt should be over there. Let's go here to see if we can find her. Well, as you can see, it's not here. But the movie was good. We're not going to talk until we get out, because it's not allowed to film again. That's the apprentice pillar. That's Lucifer.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Rosslyn Chapel. My name is Helen. I'm one of the guides here, and it's my pleasure to offer you the 12:15 information talk. Now, the talk, as you can hear, will be in English with a Yorkshire accent. It's doing what I do, and will last approximately 10 to 15 minutes. You're more than welcome to come and join us here in the views, but you can also carry on looking around the chapel if that's what you come here in the grounds and in the glen. If there's anything where you're hearing it, I'm fitting to an induction loop, just put your T-switch on. Well, we have 600 years of history here at Rosslyn, so let's get started. The Sinclair family were descendants of Norse Vikings who eventually settled in Normandy, northern France. And it's thought that they came to this country with their illegitimate cousin, William the Conqueror, in 1066. And they soon became a rich and powerful landowning family with very close ties to the Scottish king. In 1446, Sir William Sinclair began work building Rosslyn Chapel, close to the family home in the glen of Rosslyn Castle. And the chapel was to be his family's private place of worship. It's said that he wanted to create a Bible in stone. Now, Sir William's original intention was for a cathedral-sized building, built in the traditional cruciform or cross shape, and with a central tower tall enough to be seen from Edinburgh. It was to be built in the late Gothic style, characterised by high vaulted ceilings and ornate arches. But we're certainly not cathedral sized, and we definitely don't have that central tower. And there's a very simple reason for that. 40 years into the build, Sir William died, and work on the chapel just stopped. Now, Sir William had lived a long and fruitful life. He lived till he was aged mid-70s, but this is a time where you were lucky if you saw your 35th birthday. And he'd been married 2, or some say 3 times, resulting in somewhere between 14 and 18 children. Whichever way you look at it, that's an awful lot of children. And it's his oldest son by his second marriage, Oliver, who inherits the chapel. But Oliver may only have inherited the building, no wealth. He doesn't finish his father's grand cathedral plan either. In fact, there is no further work done on the chapel until the 1800s. The other name for Rosslyn Chapel is the Collegiate Church of St Matthew. Collegiate meaning a place of learning. And as you're wandering around looking at the carvings after the talk, you'll see that some of them represent stories from the Old Testament of the Bible and some from the New. And certainly Rosslyn has a Christian congregation who still worship here and many Christian visitors. But we also get people visiting for lots of other different reasons. There are people who come because they've read the Da Vinci Code or they've seen the film. We'll come back to that later. There are Freemasons that visit and Knights Templar enthusiasts. And they'll all look for very different things of symbolism amongst the carving. Now, the easiest way to explain this clearly to you is to show you the carving that we call the crucifixion, here just above the north door. And you can clearly see Christ on the cross in the centre. However, if you've come here today as a Knights Templar follower or as a Freemason, you might interpret that carving as the burning at the stake of Jacques de Molay. He was the last Grand Master of the Templars, and his execution took place in Paris in 1314. And so you begin to see how difficult it is for me to give you just one specific interpretation into the symbolism. And it doesn't help that we lost most of our historic records in a number of fires and battles affecting the castle down in the glen over the last several centuries. It is safe to say that there are still things here at Rosslyn that very much remain open to interpretation. Now, following the religious Reformation here in 1560, the Sinclair family secretly continued to practice Catholicism in the chapel until 1592. At that point, persecution was rife. They had very few choices. Now, they could, of course, have given up their Catholic faith, but this devout family were never going to do that. Instead, they chose to remove and destroy all 6 altars from the chapel, and they abandoned the building. A building that has no altars, it's no longer a place of worship. And the chapel remains abandoned for well over 200 years. In fact, the next time it's used is in 1650. Cromwell's army, under the leadership of General Monk, are attacking Rosslyn Castle. There's a period of about 100 days where the soldiers need somewhere safe to keep their horses. Rosslyn becomes a rather beautiful stable. And of course, it was safe. However, it wasn't warm or dry. So far in our story, there's no glass in these windows. There never has been. The likelihood being that medieval glass was just too precious, too expensive. We might have had wooden shutters. We might have had animal skins providing heavy drapes. But essentially, for decades, we're open to the elements. Well, this is Scotland. That means an awful lot of rain and wind and bad weather throughout the year, year upon year. And what that creates over time is an environment where on the inside of the chapel, all the greenery and the plants from outside and in the glen, they grow in abundance. Ferns and ivy, moss and lichen, it's all over the interior. You can't see where the real stuff ends and the carvings take over. And eventually we just become known as the Green Chapel. Now by the early 1800s, this is actually our unique selling point because we've entered the Romantic era. We've got artists, writers and poets flocking to Scotland and this area in particular to work. You'll see lots of examples over in the visitor centre. But our most famous visitor of that time was a 22-year-old Queen Victoria. She visited Rosslyn, she fell in love with the place. However, she was disappointed that we were no longer a place of worship and that we were beginning to fall into disrepair. And this prompted the third Earl to begin a period of repairs and restoration. He is responsible for the additions of the baptistry and the organ loft, the fitting of the stained glass windows, the statue behind me, and the seats that you're sitting in. They're all from the 1800s, all Victorian. In 1862, we're once more rededicated as a place of worship, this time Scottish Episcopalian, an independent branch of the Anglican Church. We're still that to this very day. However, with so many decades of that wet weather being able to come inside the building, of course, eventually, the brickwork is affected. By the 1950s, we're in need of some conservation. Techniques used at the time were incredibly basic, even though this is only 70 years ago. The workmen came in and they removed all the greenery using stiff bristled brushes and an ammonia wash. But we're made out of sandstone. It's local, quarried just in the glen by the side of us, and a beautiful soft stone for carving. It needs treating with some respect and some fragility. However, they then went on to spray the whole of the interior with this grey cement slurry or paint, hence the uniform colour on the interior, rather than the natural pinks and oranges and yellows of natural sandstone. You'll see that to good effect on the exterior walls of the building. All that work really did was to lock moisture into an already saturated building. The brickwork still can't breathe. It continues to deteriorate over the decades. By the 1990s, it's clear something must be done to save this building. And in 1995, the Rosslyn Chapel Trust was created. Their aim was to raise money for a 50-year conservation plan. And a few years into it, they had enough to put a 50-ton canopy or umbrella over the outside of the whole building, allowing us to start drying from the inside out for the very first time. Now that drying out process took the next 15 years or so. It included the addition of underfloor heating and lead fitting to the top of the sandstone roof and ceiling. By the end of that 15-year period, we also have the coincidence of the Rosslyn miracle, although you'll know it better if I say that it was in 2003 that Dan Brown published that book, the Da Vinci Code. And I'm sure there are people here who've read the book or seen the movie or who know there's a connection to here at Rosslyn. Well, that book, believe it or not, went on to sell well over 80 million copies worldwide. It was translated into over 40 languages, and it becomes a top 10 bestseller of all times. Now, it's up there on that list with the first Harry Potter book and an art book called 50 Shades of Grey. We'll say no more about that. Now, even better for us, in 2006, they made a film of the book. They did come here to film. They were here for just under a week. The two main characters, Robert and Sophie, they're shown coming in through the baptistry. There's a lovely shot of the ceiling, and they end up in the main body of the church looking for a symbol. What they're looking for is the six-pointed star, the inverted blade and the chalice, the male and female symbols. Unfortunately, Rosslyn has never had that star. Lots of other stars, but not that one. However, Dan Brown said we had one, so the props department made one. And they stuck it on the lintel, going down the stairs to the crypt. When Robert and Sophie see it, they know that that's where they have to go. We found out about it when they took it away, because as you'll see for yourselves, it's left a small circular mark on the stone, which we now refer to as the Hollywood Circle. And you can follow in Robert and Sophie's footsteps and go down to the crypt. You'll see it's at least a century older than up here at this level. There's some very interesting things to see down there. But there isn't a rug. And there isn't a trapdoor. Unfortunately, they're 400 miles south at Pinewood Studios. However, the treasure of Rosslyn, as far as we're concerned, you found that the minute you stepped into this beautiful and very unique building. You're sitting in it right now. And because of all those people who had read the book or seen the movie and then wanted to visit, well, we were able to get our essential maintenance done in a third of the predicted time. So it is a huge thank you to Dan Brown. A very, very big thank you to the Vatican. Sales of that book weren't doing that well until the Vatican talked about banning it, and then they went through the roof. But thank you to you most of all, because every penny you spend here goes back to the not-for-profit organisation, the Rosslyn Chapel Trust. You're playing your part in keeping this beautiful and, as I say, very unique building here, hopefully for another 6 centuries. Now I'm going to leave you today with a story that's been told in here for over 300 years. The story of the apprentice pillar, probably our most famous piece of carving. However, the story actually starts with the Master Mason's pillar, this one just here. And this is the work of a medieval master craftsman at the top of his profession. A pillar like that could have taken 2 to 3 years to carve in its entirety. When it's finished, Sir William Sinclair is so delighted with it that he decides he's also going to have this pillar carving. It's got to be different, it's got to be better. Well, the Master Mason is exhausted, and he also needs ideas. He takes himself off to Europe to look at the great cathedrals for inspiration. While he's away, a young apprentice mason, a boy of maybe 14 or 15, he falls asleep somewhere inside the chapel, and he has a dream. In that dream, he sees the completed apprentice pillar, and he tells Sir William, who sees it as a sign from God, and he tasks the apprentice to carry out the work, which, as you can see, he did, and he completed it. And you can decide which of the pillars has the better carving. Everybody is delighted with the end results until the Master Mason arrives back from Europe unexpectedly. He sees the work that was his has been completed, but when he finds out it was done by his very own apprentice, he flies into a jealous rage, picks up his mason's hammer, and he strikes the young apprentice boy on the forehead, killing him outright on the floor of the chapel, just about Now, the Master Mason is hanged for his crimes. But this is medieval times. Death is by no means punishment enough. I'll ask you to turn around one last time to show you some carvings associated with this story. If you follow my light up from the banner of St. Matthew, you'll come to rest on the head in the corner said to represent the murdered apprentice. Look closely above his right eye, you'll see the gash in his forehead. Keeping him company up there, his grieving and widowed mother. On the opposite corner, the murderer, the Master Mason. He was nabbed up there by his fellow Masons because his eternal punishment is to gaze upon the work of the young apprentice and the object of his desire. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for visiting and thank you for listening. Thank you.
Well, you've heard already the entire story, or much of it. I will say only one thing more. I've read the statement here in the church that says like this: wine is strong, the king is stronger, the women are stronger still, but the truth conquers all. I'm gonna make a tour of the building. As the custode said, it should have been a bigger cathedral, but the founder died, and the son that inherited this cathedral finished the work, but didn't respect the original plan to make it larger. Lots of carvings, of course. Another legend says that there are carvings that are representing corn and maize. And let's not forget that this church was completed as it stands before the end of the 15th century, so it was before the discovering of the New World, from where we received corn. So that's Rosslyn Chapel. It's filled and full of legends and myths, and as we've heard, Dan Brown and the Vatican did a lot of good to this place, because today they do have a lot of visitors. Probably this year they'll reach up to 200,000 visitors, which is a lot, and definitely is going to help this unique building. Not far from here, a few hundred meters towards the south, you can also find the ruins of Sinclair Castle. So this is Rosslyn Chapel. I will see you next time.